Hello and welcome to the Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I am your host, Matthew Pejkovic, and this is episode number 643. Releasing December 13 in theaters across the US is The Man in the White Van, a true crime thriller that stars Madison Wolfe as a carefree teenager in 1975 Florida who becomes the target of a serial killer stalking her every move. Also starring Brett Bassinger, Ali Larter, and Sean Astin. The Man in the White Van is a cleverly crafted thriller dripping with paranoia and filled with character-driven stakes. And joining me now is the film's director, Warrens Skeels. Warren, how are you today?
I'm good, Matt. I'm in Dallas, Texas, in the middle of a seven-city advanced screening tour leading up to the opening on Friday night. So it's been a little bit of a whirlwind here at the end.
When I was watching the movie, and speaking of whirlwind, we are in Christmas time. As we're watching the movie, I got a text from Amazon saying that your package is going to be with you soon. And I thought to myself, I'm watching The Man with a White Van, and how ironic is it that these days we have no qualms whatsoever, have many vans come up to our homes and letting strangers know where we live. It's an odd time we're living in now, isn't it?
No, it's true. And the whole this is one of the origin stories, or the major origin stories for, the what has grown to be kind of the trope of like, the white van now is kind of a symbol of fear, especially in the US. But this, and along with Dean Corll and the Toolbox Killer in California, these were the stories that were happening in the 70s that, made their way into pop culture and now are just sort of these, tropes to us now, but they're very real and scary reasons why, the white van is so feared.
Well, The Man with a White Van isn't necessarily the story of Billy Mansfield, who in the 70s kind of like was like did a lot of this kind of stuff and he was found out in the 80s and such. But it is kind of like the true events of that time and his crimes are kind of like the origins for this story. So how did you find out about Billy? And because he's a really, I looked him up, he's a very nasty kind of grisly character. How did you come across him
Oh,
and
he is.
what was his inspiration for this movie?
So I was actually, strangely enough, I was working, I optioned a nonfiction book called Sudden Shot, which was based on the serial shootings in Phoenix in 2005, 2006. And I
Mm.
was at dinner with a producer friend of mine, and he was like, "Oh, if you like serial killer stories, you ought to talk to my wife." And so I did. And as we ended up kind of meeting for a few coffees, and she just kind of unpacked this childhood experience of living in Brooksville, Florida back in the 70s, and how she was followed and stalked and hunted by this white van, this man in the white van. And, she wasn't the only one. And I was really grounded with her story and her POV, which was kind of exciting to me to tell the story from the survivor and the victim side of things. But then, of course, just doing the due diligence of research and looking more into who that man was, and, ultimately Billy Mansfield Jr. I mean, it's not just crimes in Florida. He was arrested and incarcerated in California and is serving, 5 life sentences out there now. And 45 years later, they're still working cold cases on this
Mm.
guy. There's a detective in Jacksonville and an organization called Project Cold Case who um, thought they had a victim of Billy Mansfield, and he flew out to California, sat down with Billy Mansfield, and in first interview he denied it, but he went back with some additional information about a year later, and just this past March, Billy Mansfield admitted to confessing to the murder of Carol Ann Barrett in March of 1980.
Mm.
So there are I'm heartened to know that these cold case detectives are working and holding on to key evidence, and DNA evidence that, they believe they'll be able to identify uh, victims of Billy Mansfield still.
The Matt's Movie Reviews YouTube channel is brought to you by TeePublic. TeePublic is the world's largest marketplace for independent creators to sell their work on the highest quality merchandise. With over 1.2 million designs, TeePublic is sure to have something you'll love. what works so well about the man in the white van is that even if you take out the kind of like the true crime kind of serial killer kind of thing aspect of it, it works really well, kind of like as a coming of age story with this
Mhm.
character of played by Madison Wolfe in the film, the character of Annie. And what I think makes it work so well is the domestic scenes, the scenes with her family.
Mhm.
It comes across very kind of organic in such. How important was it to make sure that the basis of the film wasn't so much exploitative, wasn't so much about the killer, but you want to make the basis of the film is that you're going to anchor in this family first, so you understand who these
Mhm.
characters are, what world they're living in, and then you kind of slowly drip in this kind of like influence of this white band that's kind of like stalking right behind him and strikes at the right time.
It was critically important for me as a filmmaker to hook the audience into Annie's world, her environment, her family, set up her dynamics, in a coming of age story, because she really was this girl that was on the precipice of becoming a young woman, but still caught up in being a kid, liking boys, but not wanting to, make any attention of it against her friend's best wishes, who was, kind of boy crazy.
Hmm.
And then, and her sister being, older and a little bit of a debutante and wanting to kind of bring her younger sister up into that world. And, there's just something about that dynamic that, based off of the real life Annie, that I really just wanted to sink, our teeth into as writers and ultimately as a director to root the story with her in a way that was an audience could really gravitate to and start to root for her as she's, having her first conversations with the new boy at school, and there seems to be interest there. And Madison Wolfe, who plays Annie, just a lovely way of kind of being humble in that sense, when as Annie, where there's zero expectations that this guy would have any interest whatsoever in her, um, and that surely she would be this new guy is going to be he's already kind of claimed by kind of her nemesis at the school, Joanna. So she doesn't really feel like she has any shot with him, but it turns out that he actually is very much interested in her. And um, I think there's kind of a universality to that and in that story that hopefully resonates with the audience. And the goal was really to be able to tell that coming of age story and then and then juxtapose that with this white van sort of making its way into her world. And it was something that she was aware of at first, but didn't want the negative attention, which I get in talking to the real life Annie. Young girls don't want negative attention like that, right?
Right.
They want positive attention. So it's easy to sort of want to push that away and not believe it's really what that something really nefarious is going on there, and that it's really just some guys, whatever, and make light of it or just dismiss it. And ultimately for her, that became really difficult when she decided that was very real to her and went to her parents. They didn't really know how to deal with the information. They knew that their daughter was clearly going through something, but to the level of danger that she, was sort of emitting at, I don't think they were really prepared for that. And I don't think that, and obviously they didn't really believe her fully because she sort of has a girl who cried wolf, disposition, having told tales and white lies and exaggerations. So it all kind of culminates in setting up, this disbelief from the parents and isolation of Annie and having to sort of deal with this predator one on one.
I know in the film, and you've spoken before about how you do want to show the killer's face because it isn't the killer's story; it's any story more than anything else. But there's an interesting substitute in that in the van itself. It seems to me like the van is kind of like a beast, a monster in the movie, kind of like its own kind of like entity, almost not driven but driven to kind of like do the things that it does. Did you have a thought of that of like? Especially just in the way that the motor would start. It's kind of like a raw kind of like behind it? Was it always a thought to kind of like have the van kind of like be its own thing, not like a tool used by a serial killer, but be like its own kind of like menacing kind of creature in its own right?
Absolutely. From the very beginning, um, we wanted the van to be a villain. We wanted the van to be its own character. Obviously the man driving it is the ultimate villain, but the white van is essentially his henchman, if you will.
Mm,
And we likened that to we the cinematographer and I, we watched Duel,
yeah.
Spielberg's Duel, Stephen King's Christine, and sort of kind of drew some inspirations from how they were shooting those vehicles and kind of bringing them to life. Because it kind of, I mean, even for Annie and her world, it sort of became its own entity. It was a character in her world, and we wanted to be able to express that for an audience. Um, and then another element. It's funny, you've got the Jaws poster up behind you, but how the van interacted with her, I really looked at as, a great white sort of circling in the waters beneath the surface, around the town or behind in the forest or off in the distance, as this sort of metaphor of the shark sort of circling her and waiting for that perfect moment to capture her.
Yeah, the great white van instead of the great white shark, right?
Right, the great white van.
Um, and I think that's I found really interesting about the movie is that I get a lot of horror films sent to me, serial killer movies, etc. And sometimes filmmakers will just lavish too much on the crimes, on the grisliness, the violence. This film is interesting in that it isn't a movie that kind of doesn't skip away from what the killer does, but it doesn't focus to the point where it gets gory and such as that as well. And it's really interesting in just how effective it can still be. You've spoken before about the theater of the mind, letting the mind go to
Mhm.
places and such. And I think the theater of the mind only works if people have enough resources in their own head to kind of conjure up the images. And I think we've been worked on such a steady diet of violence and blood on TV, in movies, in real life, that we can access those things now even more proficiently than maybe people did in the past. And I'm curious when it comes to yourself when making this movie, whether it was always a debate whether to rely on the audience to be able to access those memories, those visions or such, or whether there was any push whatsoever to kind of go all in and looking at the crimes. And I understand why you wouldn't as well, because they were pretty horrific as well. But was there ever kind of debate of whether to or not to kind of dive into violence more or less?
It's a really good question. And, I think obviously these crimes and what was committed were really heinous. And, for us, since we were rooted with Annie and telling the survivor's story, we just wanted to be able to texture in and allude to how, uh, how deep and dark, that what was happening with the white van outside of her world and the not to spoil it for the audience, but in the other timeline where we see things happening we see the results of people disappearing with the white van. We sort of texture in the dramatic irony for the audience that they'll know, okay, we know what that van is really capable of in her world. And then we're back in Annie's timeline. We know that. But she doesn't know that. And, not wanting, kind of continuing to dismiss the van, we know she should absolutely not be dismissing this van and, in fact, taking it quite seriously. Um, so that was sort of kind of an important piece of it.
The Matt's Movie Reviews podcast is brought to you by Amazon Prime Video. One of the best on-demand streaming services available, Amazon Prime Video features exclusive Amazon originals as well as popular movies and TV shows. Watch Amazon Prime Video anytime, anywhere. Well, for everyone out there listening, The Man in the White Van, Friday the 13th in theaters. Go watch this in theaters, everyone listening. We need to support indie filmmakers. We need to support films like these. I think it's time to remind everyone there's more movies out there instead of Wicked and Gladiator 2. There's a whole gamut of movies out there, especially on Friday the 13th. If you want to watch something that's really cool, a scare movie, it could be a date movie as well. I mean, this is the ultimate kind of like one of my favorite, I think, crime thrillers I've seen this year because I love the way Warren that you guys stage the scenes. I love the way you execute them, and I find it very impressive that you're able to do so with very little bloodshed as well. There's some, but not excessive, and I think it's really important that you know, people know that because I think people might see a serial killer thriller and might get turned away. I'm telling you guys right now, this is incredible kind of filmmaking craft here because again, it's going to play with that theater of your mind. It's gonna make you stand up in your seats, and it's got some really good jump scares. A couple of good jump scares in me that actually got me. One involving a barn. That was really well done. So
Good,
congratu
good.
congratulations to you, Warren, and best of luck with the film's
Sure.
release.
Thank you. The theater of the mind piece of it all, what we don't see can be much more scary, I think, sometimes than what we do see. And we do, like you said, we have a sort of a Rolodex in our minds, as contemporary moviegoers, especially if you enjoy this genre, horror,
Mm,
thriller, true crime. Um, and it's sort of like you can, and I appreciate, films like the Terrifier series, like and people go to that to see the gore. They go to it to see just to what lengths, that slasher element can kind of play itself out in gore. So and on the flip side of it, this is a film that I didn't really feel like needed that. It needed
mm.
to be, we were sort of rooted with this 15-year-old girl, and the disappearances to me were really how those women's lives uh to the public, that's really what happened. They just disappeared.
Yeah.
And nobody really knew what happened to them until it was kind of discovered that they had been murdered in certain ways and were buried, um and so I think that experiencing them as disappearances really sort of textures in how that time period also experienced those victims' experiences.
And for me, it's kind of like a two-pronged nightmare scenario where on one end you got the serial killer thing, but on the other end you have this girl who's screaming out to help from people for the people to love her to listen, and they won't, or they can't, or they refuse to. And I think that's like a nightmare in itself when you are, you're in the ocean, that shark's circling, you're screaming for help, and the people on the boat just won't throw you a life preserver, and you're on your own there. And
Right.
I think it's a really effective way you've done it. And again, everyone, this Friday 13, US cinemas, watch this film. You'll really enjoy it. And yeah, again, Warren Skills, thank you so very much for your time today, and congrats with the film. It's an excellent film. I thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matt. These were I love this. This was a great interview. I loved all your questions. They're so thoughtful and specific.
Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content.